Okay, let's get started, everyone. This session is the session entitled Teaching Truth in Science and Math. So, if you're wondering whether or not you're in the right place, if you're here for that, welcome. My name is Pastor Steve Kieser. As I mentioned earlier, I serve most of my time as the headmaster and associate pastor at Faith Lutheran Church and School in Plano, Texas. And I also am involved with the consortium. What I didn't mention is that in my previous life, I trained to be a science and math teacher. I am a graduate at Concordia, Ann Arbor, and my initial degree, certification, whatever it is termed, was secondary education, 6 through 12, grades 6 through 12, in math and science. So to teach pre-algebra, algebra, and geometry, algebra 2, pre-calculus, those were the areas that I prepared to teach, as well as the sciences, and in particular biology. That was my first love, but also in the state of Michigan was certified to teach physics and chemistry and the earth sciences. So I do not have any of those certifications today. I just haven't bothered to keep up with those. And yet, I have managed to find ways to stay involved teaching math and science, especially most recently at Faith in Plano. Last year, I taught physics to 11th and 12th graders. I also have taught at our school the pre-calculus class, which is kind of an awful name for a math class, isn't it? Pre-calculus. I guess it's the class that comes before calculus. But we addressed a lot of topics such as understanding functions and using functions. We explored trigonometry and went into depth, beginning with the unit circle, and had the kids memorize those basic points around the unit circle, as well as conic sections and things of that sort. So that's been good for me because it has taken me back to the classroom, and when you get away from it for a while, you forget things. And so it's been good to get back into the classroom. What I'd like to do with you today is share an idea. It hasn't been approved by anybody, so I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. What I have been thinking about and would invite you to think about with me is how is it possible that we might teach conveying truth in our classrooms, in the way that we teach. So this conference is about truth, and we're going to hear a lot about that from many of our presenters. But I'd like to think about it in terms of how it is that might take place in the classroom with your students. One of the things, the other parallel things that has happened to me is that I and our school will be subject to a visit from the Consortium for Classical Lutheran Education as an accreditation visit. And I'm worried about that a little bit, no. Because I've been a visitor at some of your schools I've been to, and I know that they're good for us, but what sometimes is good is painful a little bit too. And so I've been thinking about our curriculum. And we've started some things. I see a couple, one or two of our teachers here, and about how we might write our curriculum, but even more, how we might write our curriculum in terms of truth. And what I'd like to propose to you today is this idea. Get rid of this drawing. Truth statements convey truth in math and science education. So, that is the topic. Truth statements convey truth in math and science education. Most anyone who has been through a teacher training program, such as I have at Concordia Ann Arbor, have been taught to write curricula. And how is it that you have been taught to do that?
Templates.
Okay, we may have a variety of answers to this. It may not be the same as mine. But let's write that down. Templates. What do you mean by templates?
Well, like Concordia Med One, they gave us a nice little thing that had a header of Concordia, and there was a spot for objectives and a spot for a catch or introduction, and then the body of teaching, and then the assessment. And you just plugged in your parts.
So this format where you had objectives, some sort of introduction, you teach, and then you assess what you've taught.
And if you wanted to really touchy-feely, it'd be like reflective.
Okay, let's add reflection. This is the opportunity for what does the Pythagorean theorem mean to me? So, all right. So I would agree that this was also my education, that the lesson, what was to happen during the 37 minutes or however long your periods are. At our school, unfortunately, it's 37 minutes. It's kind of a problem. We need to figure that out, how to make that longer. Some of you are, I agree with that. But at any rate, during this period of time, whether it's 45 minutes, 55 minutes, whatever time you have to teach that lesson, what drives what goes on in the classroom? It may be that you have a textbook that you're using as a primary outline. I think many classical schools still use some form of resource. Maybe we don't want to call it a textbook, but they still use some sort of resource that really drives what goes on. Am I wrong about that? Does anyone use in math, let's say math, does anyone not use a textbook in math class? Okay, you don't use any textbooks at all. Okay, so it is. What do you do?
Well, or modern textbooks. So primary sources, things like Euclid Elements or such.
Okay. So when it comes to making, do you assign homework problems for your students?
Yes, they have to be created.
They have to be what?
They have to be created.
They have to be created, teacher created. Oh, okay, so you write all of your own math problems.
They're more effective. So, fewer problems, but trying to assess understanding the problem solving. Things like that.
Okay, all right. How many here, how many are elementary school teachers? How many teach in the elementary grades? Is everybody basically, or whether you're homeschool, whether you're in the classroom, you teach in elementary school? Okay, let's find out. How many of you use Saxon mathematics in the elementary school? Does anyone not use Saxon mathematics? Okay, may I ask, what do you use?
Hardcore Brace, it's an online program.
Oh, okay. So,
Hardcore Brace.
so what we have, just by a show of hands, is that the majority of the folks in this room use the Saxon Math series in elementary school. And then there are two of you. We have one self-produced materials, and we have one that uses Harcourt Brace online.
You use Singapore
Okay, and you use Singapore?
for 9 years. I
Okay.
decided between Saxon and Singapore, and that was the decision. The new school I'm at now has Saxon.
Okay,
At a previous location, I was principal of the school.
okay. I was recently at the Society for Classical Learning conference at the Intercontinental in Dallas. Very few of them are using Saxon anymore in those schools. They are big fans of Singapore math. And I think that's worth taking another look at with our Christian counterparts using Singapore math. Ed Veith has, and there are maybe others too, that have pointed out a different focus of Saxon math. And I go to his Patheos page, blog site, and take a look, do a search for John Saxon. And he borrows from some of the history of Saxon, how Saxon, his ideas were rejected by many in the textbook industry. And when Saxon died, and he was bought out by those who were his detractors, and the newer Saxon books maybe have more of their influence. That's just been a suggestion. I'm not here to verify that, but since I trust a lot of what Ed Veith publishes, I'm assuming there may be some truth to that. Yes?
That may be why when we were exploring them, we actually went back to an older version of Saxon because we thought it was better.
Yes. Does anybody know what the year that supposedly
The 93 version is the one that gets switched, and it's not as good as the previous
Yeah,
version.
we
Okay.
went to some of the earlier versions of it because we liked it better.
Somebody needs to
I don't know what we were.
investigate that and provide what they find to the rest of us. I'd be interested in knowing that story.
It's very Common Core focused now than your publication.
Okay.
You can tell by the names they use, it's no longer, if Sally had 3 pickles, now it's Shaniqua has 52 pickles.
Let me ask also, so I know what we're dealing with. This is math. It's supposed to be math and science. So in your elementary schools, what are you using for science education? Does anyone self-produce their science materials? Okay. I mean,
You kind of add to it.
okay, add to it, but as the primary backbone of your curriculum, how many of you self-produce?
Cut and paste.
Cut and paste?
Again, you've got 2 different books, but you
Yeah.
take the best from each one.
Okay,
Or a little bit from each.
okay. I think every teacher does that. I think public school teachers do that, by the way. I think a lot of people. Teachers have been doing that for a long time. They may have a primary resource, but they bring in things. Well, okay, so I really want to move on to what are you using then as your primary text resource? Okay, Abeka. Okay, use the answers in Genesis as a supplement. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Ross will use elemental science
Manual uses that too.
and Memorial uses Apologia.
The Apologia. Okay. Anybody else? What's that?
God's World.
God's World? Some of these names are escaping me. Or one of these, the BJUP, Bob Jones University Press book? I don't know forget what their I'm going to write up here because I know some of our schools are using Bob Jones University Press. Let me ask this next question. When you choose your science curriculum, what are you primarily looking for?
What our goal is at the end. We know what we want them to know by the end. So that's what we look for.
Okay.
How am I going to be able to teach that?
Okay.
So our curriculum, we've been developing it for a year now, and this is what we want them to do, and how are we going to do it?
Okay, I'm going to write down what you just said. This is what we want them to do. Okay. This statement, I believe, is tied right here in the template. Okay? This is what we want them to do. In other words, we have an objective, right? And we typically state the objective in terms of what?
The student will.
What the student will do. So it's behavioral. Okay? So the goal of the lesson then is to affect student behavior. Is that true? Okay. So objectives, this is what we want them to do, is the primary purpose by the time we do the template is to affect student behavior. Write that down. Okay. I didn't know I was going to get that out of that question, but since I got it and I wanted it to be up here on the board, I'm going to leave it up there for now. What is the big thing that many Christian Lutheran publishers look for, or classrooms look for in science curriculum?
Scriptural.
Okay. If nothing else, we typically reject any textbook that has what? Okay, that has an evolutionary worldview. Now,
We like the one that has the evolutionary worldview so that they know what's being taught, but then how to defend against that through Scripture.
okay. I think most of these resources avoid evolution. I'm not sure about this one.
The text, elemental science is a skeleton. So it uses encyclopedias, which all contain that kind of stuff, but it's more about teaching truths of science
Okay.
than having the teacher relate it as opposed to sort of a narrative.
Okay. Okay. All right. I find that, I think that's interesting. One of my concerns about science education, since we're talking about this section right now, it seems to me, this is a bias of mine, it seems to me that many science textbooks that are not Christian, that are typical science textbooks, want to avoid Christianity or avoid a creationist account at all costs. And it seems to me that more and more textbooks that are published outside of the Christian realm are putting forward an apologetic for a non-Christian worldview. And one of the examples that I can give is that when we were looking at history curricula last year, there were many times throughout typical, say, third grade, fourth grade history textbook that made sure that they inserted a million years, or that they inserted something that really involved this idea of that humanity has come from a natural process, an accidental process, but this accident. And they seem overwhelmed, even in trying to tell their history of the world with that thought. I just found that interesting, that the textbook itself, the authors would go to that much trouble to make this point, not just once, maybe not just the first chapter, but kept bringing it up throughout the book. At any rate, I think that it's true that a lot of our schools use curricula that avoids evolution. Back to my concern then for these texts. My concern for these texts is that these texts sometimes spend so much time in an apologetic for the Christian faith that they don't really get into and discuss great science. There is a lot of wonderful and beautiful things to talk about that we get sidetracked because we are always trying to make the case for Genesis chapter 1. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe Genesis chapter 1 is absolutely true, and I hold to the position that God created the world in 6 24-hour days, and on the 7th 24-hour day He rested, and from there on we had 24-hour days. I confess that young earth, creationist perspective. And while that may come up on occasion throughout our lessons, there are many more things to talk about in science and math education than simply always trying to make that point at the sake of not discussing and getting into real science. By the way, before I forget this, if you have not read, there's a great book, I think, that every science educator ought to read by a Lutheran. It's actually, it's an anthology, I think it is. It's called Reading God's World. Anybody read this book? You might know the author of that book? Anybody married to that author? This is Dr. Angus Manouche, who happens to be here, okay? And makes a great case. Pastor Hill was talking about language today and the importance of language in truth. And this metaphor of language is used in understanding science education. And I think Dr. Angus Manouche and several of the authors that he has brought together in that book have a wonderful way of viewing science education. I'd encourage you to read this book. It's published by Concordia Publishing House. Okay. There's another book for you mathematicians, and really I lump them all together, mathematicians and scientists. But another great book, he is not Lutheran. His name is James Nichol. Anybody read this book by James Nichol? It's entitled, I think it's just simply entitled Mathematics. Anybody know the subtitle to that book? Mathematics. Is God Silent? Thank you. Going from memory, my office was packed up, and I didn't use my laptop, and I had many things written on a manila or on a yellow legal pad that looked like this, and it was packed up, and I couldn't find it prior to this get together. But anyway, that's a great book to read. Also, he discusses the history of mathematics, beginning with Adam, and going through many. Going through the history of mathematics, history of man, and talks about mathematics. Yes, sir?
Now, I haven't read them, but those two seem like they lend to one of the first things we left off the initial list.
Okay.
We talked about how we determine their curriculum. And that is a philosophy. And especially a classical Christian education conversation, that becomes important because everything that follows can be looked at in the context of what your philosophy is. And that's a part of the right curriculum.
Yeah.
The curriculum is not any textbook that we have.
Right.
And if everything we're doing in these classes is all reflective of that philosophy, and I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. It seems like those two books they are geared toward specific curricular elements, right? Those are geared toward a view of teaching math and teaching science.
Yeah, I think we can also say this, and certainly agree with you. I think that one's philosophy influences how we will state these objectives. One's philosophy isn't always made known by a statement at the beginning of the lesson, but it's determined as the lesson goes along, and you start to see.
That's right. I didn't mean a generic philosophy. I mean a Christian philosophy. I meant
right.
a Christian worldview philosophy.
Absolutely.
What your church would stand for.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why we hire Lutherans as our full-time teachers in our school. You know, those things, because we understand their worldview, etc. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, we rely heavily when we're looking at science books on how it's written, the language of it, including sometimes you have science textbooks that take pages and pages to say absolutely nothing.
Yes, yes.
Right.
And if the content isn't there, then it's not useful as a guide.
Yeah.
And what vocabulary they use and what sentence structure they use.
Yeah.
And so we rely heavily in science.
Yeah, it's one of my criticisms of the Apologia, by the way. The Apologia, to me, is meant to be conversational, Dr. Weil talking to you as you're sitting around the table, but it omits so much good science, in my opinion. It's sort of science light.
And that is what we do like about the one we have chosen, because, for example, with global warming, we go into how God designed the world and how these gases are used to cool it, and how these gases, and He created it all.
Right.
He has created everything that it needs, and
Absolutely, yeah. I want to go back to what I said at the beginning, because we've sort of gone a lot of different directions, but I want to bring us back to this idea: truth statements convey truth in math and science education. And the way I want to frame that is to take us where I think that we are in many classrooms, and that is that we have a template, if we want to call it that, that is driven by behavioral objectives. Behavioral objectives state what the student will be able to do by the time they've experienced your 45 minutes. Okay? That there is something about the student that will be affected, so to speak. Okay? Here is my idea. My idea is that what happens in the math and science classroom, and really I would take this even beyond that, is by templating our lessons upon truth statements rather than objectives, and using objectives at the end to measure assessment. So, what's a truth statement? Well, a truth statement is something that is true, and it is written as a declarative sentence. Rather than being concerned immediately about how a student's going to behave after this lesson, a truth statement rather becomes more focused on what is true that I will convey during this lesson. What truth or truths or truth statements will be expressed. Okay? So, a truth statement then is something that is true, and it's written as a declarative sentence. And its job, its duty, its office is to convey truth in the subject being learned. And since this is a math and science section, we're going to say math and science. So, what I have done is I have borrowed, I'm so glad that most of you have Saxon Math, because I borrowed some sheets from Saxon Math and brought them along today. So, how many of you teach first grade math at your school? All right, first grade math. Lesson number 1. You will have this as your first lesson of the school year in just a short amount of time. Let me get rid of some of this here. So you understand my point. My point is that rather than beginning with what the students will do, I'm not against students doing something. I'm not against a behavioral objective. I'm just saying that what would drive the lesson that we have during this time together would be a truth statement. All right, so I think I'll keep that up there. I'm going to get rid of this. The title for Saxon Lesson 1, Grade 1, is Identifying What Mathematicians Do. Okay? That's a title. It's not a complete sentence. But what's the implication? Is it a true statement? Is it intended to be a true statement? Or do you think that is intended to be an objective of what the student will be able to do? Yeah. So the objective is, and it's written in here also, matter of fact, it's tied, because we're in Texas, it's tied to Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. It says the student will identify mathematics in everyday situations. So that's a student-driven behavioral objective. It is driven by the best of behavioral social scientists and that whole way of thinking. Not necessarily classicist, but more behaviorally driven. This would be my suggestion. Rather than saying at the beginning of a lesson, students, by the end of the lesson today, you will be able to identify what mathematicians do, is to simply state what it is, the content, this is content-based, the content which will be explored during the lesson. So, instead you might write, mathematicians do math. I'm trying to be a first grader, okay? Mathematicians do math or mathematics. Now, we can come up with better statements. Maybe you can improve upon that, but you get my point. It's a statement that's true. Is it true? Do mathematicians do math?
Yes.
Do they do other things? Probably, but do they do math? Yes, they do. That's a true statement. So the true statement that we are trying to convey in the lesson is this idea right here, that mathematicians do math. One of my criticisms of Saxon is that even the objectives are not always clear in the lesson plan, even if they're using behavioral objectives. When you turn to page 4 of the lesson plan, and those of you that use Saxon, these are scripted. So if you don't know what to say, you know what to say because you can simply read the script. There are some beginning activities that they do, but when they get to what's called the new concept, and in Saxon math there's always a new concepts section. Again, this is entitled Identifying What Mathematicians Do. So I'm going to play the part of a first grade teacher. This year, we will often take turns sharing our ideas. When someone is speaking, it is important that they know we are listening. When we listen to someone, we look at them, sit quietly, and wait until they finish speaking to raise our hands. When we listen to someone, what will we have to remember to do? Wait for answers. This year, you will start to become mathematicians. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. That is the lesson introduction. Now, you might ask yourself, is this a lesson on learning what mathematicians do, or is this a lesson on how to behave while I'm teaching?
Behavior.
It's all behavior-centered again, and it really doesn't have anything to do with mathematics, does it? But that's the lesson script, if you were to follow the script as printed, okay? So then, after this year, we will start to become mathematicians. Then the next sentence actually is this statement, mathematicians do math. So the true statement is included there. And then there is some other things that are said. In this lesson in particular, my concern would be that student behavior ought to be taught outside of math class. We can do that at other times. Not during math class, although we might have to remind them during math class to do these things, right? They are first graders. We might have to remind them. But really, that we I would propose this, that either spoken or written, that a math class, first grade, might begin with this. The truth we're going to learn today is that mathematicians do math. Mathematicians do math. Okay? And begin there. And that drives the rest of the lesson, exploring that truth. Okay? Now, I'm not getting into how to do that, et cetera, et cetera. My focus here is to simply try to explore this idea, which I'm trying to do with you, model this. True statements convey truth in math and science education. Let's look at another lesson. Let's go to lesson 51. First grade. Sorry, I just pulled from the first grade folder. Here's the title of lesson 51, also tied to TEKS. The students will be able to create sets of tens and ones using concrete objects to describe whole numbers. The students will be able to use patterns to skip count by twos. The students will be able to find patterns in numbers including odd and even. The students will be able to use tools such as manipulatives to solve problems. And those are the 4 objectives for this lesson. When you get to the new concept part of this lesson, which is scripted, as all Saxon is, all Saxon lessons are, on page 5 of the lesson plan, let's see if I can do this one with you. Pencil? Yeah. Read these numbers silently to yourself. Does anyone know what the next number will be? Yes. 8 is correct. Let's read the numbers together. Everyone? 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. Today you will learn a special name for these numbers. What did we do to get from 0 to 2? No. We skipped a number. What did we do to get from 0 to 2? We skipped 1. What did we do to get from 2 to 4? Just bringing back memories for some of you. What do we do to get from 4 to 6? What do we do to get from 6 to 8? Skip 7. What do you think the number next to the 8 will be if we skip a number? Right, 10. Now, just want to stop here in the middle of this lesson. Maybe I'm the only kid that was this way. I'm the one that liked to kind of read the end of the book before, so I know how it ends. But at the beginning of the lesson, what was promised? Today you will learn a special name for these numbers.
Never got it.
Have we even used the word even numbers yet? No, we haven't. So, here is a possible truth statement for this lesson. Actually, they get a little longer, so I'll just read it to you. The even numbers to 20 are identified by counting by twos. I mean, this is fairly simple stuff, right? But it sets the lesson right away to saying what truth is expressed in this lesson, and this is what we're going to do. The even numbers to 20 are identified by counting to twos. The behavioral objective, I think, could be limited to simply one. The student will identify the even numbers to 20. Now, let me try one more with you, and then I have another idea. On lesson 70, let's see. Yeah, on lesson 71, same lesson. Title is Using a Ruler to Draw a Line Segment. Behavior objective, right? The students are going to use a ruler to draw a line segment. The lesson goes through, et cetera, et cetera. My suggested truth statement. Rulers may be used to draw line segments. It's true. It's a truth statement. Student objective. The student will use a ruler to draw a line segment. Behavioral objective. Maybe to create, let's see if, let me see if you have any, can help me with this. Do you, given 3 examples now and tried to define what a truth statement is, do you see advantages, disadvantages in beginning a lesson with truth statements rather than behavioral objectives? Or do you disagree with me? You can feel free to do that. Yes, ma'am.
I agree. I teach 6th grade also. It would hold the teacher to the topic very well because the 6th grader will tell you you're off topic very quickly.
Okay. It really helps to hone the lesson, doesn't it, when you know what it is that you're going to teach. My idea is that the curriculum would be driven by content rather than student behavioral objectives, what I want to manipulate the kids to do after the end of 45 minutes. But rather to begin with true statements. By beginning with true statements, then we say to the students that are listening what it is that is true about mathematics that we're going to learn today, content-based. Yes, sir?
You and I have talked about this before. And so last year, I required all my faculty to do this for a number of subjects. And I taught 6th grade math. And so I wrote theses for every single lesson.
They've also been called theses, right?
Exactly. And once they finished the fast fact sheet, every student's job was to write down the theses. And my most diligent students had 122 lessons worth of theses written down. And that's how we did every lesson. Now we did the rest of the Saxon things too. But the core was based on your discussion and suggestions that a thesis will give the truth of the math lesson. And it helped me, because I'm not a math person, I'm a language person, actually do math. So it was very useful.
Yes?
It's not about teaching, but when it comes to curriculum, then, how would you, okay, you got a grin on your face, so.
Yes.
How would you implement all of those truths into your curriculum?
Here's my suggestion. All of us are being asked to think about curriculum who are going through CCLE accreditation. I am suggesting a model known as curriculum mapping. The person who knows the most about curriculum mapping that I know is Dr. Jackie Veith. Ask her about that. She knows a lot about it. Curriculum mapping can be used with student objectives. The Indiana District Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has all behavioral objectives and encourages all their schools to write behavioral objectives into curriculum mapping. But this is my point. I would like to have a curriculum that is driven by content rather than behavioral objectives. And that's really my bottom line. What I'm encouraging, what we've already tried at our school, is to use an Excel spreadsheet that I have provided for the teachers this first time around. We did talk about the map itself and the template. I provided some examples. We revised it. I provided copies back to our staff. But in this, in the map, we map according to the flow of the school year. So week 1 These would be weeks. And then I also wanted to encourage days, because we all know that not all weeks in school are created equally. Some are 2-day weeks, some are 5-day weeks, okay? So the number of days, let's say the first week of school at Faith Lutheran has 3 days in it. Then the content that will be taught during that first week is put here, rather than a student behavioral objective. So in my first day, one of my true statements would be this: mathematicians do math, if I'm a first grade math teacher. That's going to be taught. There may be other ones taught too. I would just file those in on that Excel spreadsheet. Now, rather than simply throwing out curriculum objectives, one suggestion I would have, I've talked to Dr. Veith about this, Jackie Veith, is that we might also include another category with the student objectives over here. And I would suggest that we use true statements then to drive instruction. And we use behavioral objectives to drive assessment. So this is the true statement. This drives instruction. The tied to the true statement is the behavioral objective. That behavioral objective helps me assess the student's recognition, comprehension of the true statement that was conveyed in the class.
So in that last part, you would put the students will be able to speak out by being observed.
So we can still use objectives. We use them more in the assessment phase rather than the actual bread and butter, so to speak, of the lesson itself. So the lesson's not. To me, this is my way of thinking. When the behavior objective drives the lesson itself, what's really driving me is the test.
True.
Now, we do want to find out if what I have shared as a true statement was how it was understood, how it was comprehended, right? I want to find that out. So I keep it, I just put it over here. And I can write this into my curriculum map if I want to. And you can do a lot of things with curriculum maps. You can even embed entire lesson plans in another column over here. We can hit that thing, out comes your entire lesson plan. So, am I out of time?
No.
Am I?
Yes.
Okay. I also had some for physics class. For my physics class, I had a whole list of statements for physics class. I think upper level math classes can be done exactly the same way. So, again, to conclude my lesson, true statements convey truth in math and science education. Have a great day.